Okay, so look, we'll start officially, and then as people come in, I'll just let them in. It's all very casual here. My name's Suzanne Leal, and I'm the host of Thursday Book Club. For those of you who are new or haven't been here before, what it is a weekly book club, and we meet every week very casually just to chat about books. Once a month, we have a guest author, or in tonight's case, a guest poet, to join us, although of course Michele is a writer generally, although her specialty is poetry. So for new people, if you'd like to be part of Thursday Book Club, please just go to my website, and my name's Suzanne, and you may have it on the screen, but it's SUZANNELEAL, and my website is just my name, so SuzanneLeal.com. We're a friendly bunch, don't you think, Nola? and Louise. And we'd be delighted to have you there on a weekly basis. And there's Barbie as well.
Hello, sorry, couldn't get in.
Oh, couldn't you?
No.
Well, that's interesting.
I had to try about 5 times.
Oh, I wonder what's happened there. Okay.
I don't know. It's probably, I don't know, something I've done. Don't know. No idea. Sorry.
Good. Well, look, everybody, this is Barbie. Barbie is in charge of Living Arts Canberra. Michele Seminara, you can see in the corner there, and you may know Barbie, who interviews many of our writers and poets. So today, or tonight, and there's Miranda Barrow, who belongs in this household. So today I'm delighted to have Michele Seminara as my guest. Michele is a poet, and indeed the much admired poet, Robert Adamson, has called her the finest poet of her generation, which is great praise indeed. Not only is she a poet, but Michele is also the managing editor of the literary journal Verity. She's the author of the collections Engraft, Scar to Scar, and Hush. But tonight we're going to be focusing on her newest collection, which is Suburban Fantasy. Have a good look at that cover. It's a terrific cover, terrific colour, and terrific title as well. So Michele, I'd like to welcome you and like to congratulate you on this terrific new collection. Tell me about the title. I'm fascinated by it. Why Suburban Fantasy?
Hi, Suzanne, and thank you for everyone for being here. The title is supposed to be a little bit subversive. Whenever I talk about the book, I say it's a little bit more David Lynch than Betty Crocker. So the idea is to subvert the idea of the suburban fantasy, and that's why I love the book's cover so much. I like the way when they asked me for some imagery as inspiration for the cover of the book, I sent through a lot of imagery from surrealist photographers, from female photographers from the 1940s and 50s. And what they did was take imagery that was the idea of a sort of the 50s, housewife fantasy, and then they would cut up, and pastiche it and collage it. So to really subvert that idea of the suburban fantasy. And I think that's where I was going as well with the title, that, we all have, well, perhaps not all, but many of us have that suburban fantasy. And of course, we all know that behind the doors and the windows, there's a reality going on, which is often quite different than fantasy.
It's really a title and really a cover that grabs you. I like that bright splash of pink. Was it the first cover that they showed you, your publishers, or were there other covers that you were shown?
No, there was quite a few others actually. They had about 4 covers they showed me, and they were all good, but this one really struck my eye. But initially it was in a sort of a baby pink color, and I remember saying, I really love it, but to me it's just a little bit wishy-washy. So actually I got my son, who's a little bit techie, to get onto Photoshop and to mock up something based on what they had suggested, but with the colors that I was keen on, and then sent that through, and then that's it was a done deal. So I was very, very happy with that.
It's really interesting when you've got that cooperation, isn't it, in terms of covers, and when you've got a publisher who's really wedded to the work. And did you enjoy that part of it, where you get to collaborate not only with the editing, I imagine, but also with the jacket?
Yes, very much so. I was really lucky because normally from last year, sort of backwards for the last couple of years, UWA Publishing, which has been a real force for publishing poetry, you know, it's very difficult to get a poetry book published. And under the leadership of Terry Ann White, they were doing, you know, great things. And I think one of the ways they could churn out so many incredible poetry books, and, you know, poetry is never a high seller, especially in Australia, even if someone's the best poet, you know, there's only going to be so many copies sold, so it has to be economical, I think, for a publisher to produce. And so they had the standard covers that they would use, and then unfortunately UWA Publishing, you know, had some of their funding cut, and they had to shut down the poetry arm of their publishing. So I was one of the very last people to sign a contract with them, I think, under Terry Ann's leadership. And then the book was postponed and it was put into this year. And what that meant was then their normal generic covers, where you had a sort of a, you know, to make them more economical, you had a choice of 3 sort of covers, that was finished, and they were now offering me a bespoke cover. So actually that worked out really, really well, and I was very happy with it. And I think that could be great for publishing generally, actually, because generally most poetry book covers are very, very boring, you know, and really you want a cover that's going to grab your eye, you know, when you walk into the bookstore, especially for something like poetry, which is always a hard sell. So yeah, I was very, very happy with it. It's not a very traditional poetry cover, but I do love it.
What I love when I speak to poets is when you do a reading, we can get the whole thing. So rather than just taking an excerpt from a novel or an excerpt from a non-fiction work, you can actually give us a whole poem, or if we're lucky, several poems. And I've sort of selected a few of the poems that I really liked. I mean, I thought this was a terrific collection. And I'm hoping that I might ask you to read some of those, perhaps starting with Embody.
I would love to.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have to find it. You don't have a page number for me, do you?
Yes, I do, 77.
Yes. Thank you. Beautiful. All right. So embody. This body is not a temple, but a vehicle for pleasure and pain. This body is not a vehicle, but a manifestation of pleasure and pain. Pleasure and pain are both sacred and profane revelations of body. My body swimming in water is a mere drop in a body of water. The body of water sometimes appears as a wave. Wave and drop are only briefly appeared by my slippery karmic confluence. When I swim with you in this precious body of seawater, we co-create. Later, when sense perceptions urge and attachments merge, we procreate. Roused energies rise in steamy flesh and into the other's supple body. Sometimes the dives down like a fish and quickens into being. 3 babies have anchored in my maternal cove, nascent body minds blooming in mine as I float like a yolk on the surface of this shimmering ocean's grand dream.
That's a beautiful poem. I mean, for me, about so many things and about life force. But I'm wondering what inspired that poetry, and for you, what is that poem about?
Well, I'm a Buddhist, so I have sort of a long-term view, I suppose, of birth and rebirth and life cycles. So that's one part of the poem's inspiration, and the imagery at the end about the golden yolk, you know, floating on the ocean is a really well-known actual Buddhist sort of image or symbol for how lucky it is to actually get a human rebirth. So, you know, this is a sort of a Buddhist saying that, you know, if you had a golden yoke, basically just a sort of a rope, you know, with a noose sort of floating on the ocean's surface, and every, I don't know, I can't remember the exact analogy, but every, you know, million years a turtle just happened to come up and pop its head through the yoke, that's as as rare and lucky as it is to be granted a human body and to have this opportunity to, to live in a human body on this earth. So that was one part of the inspiration, just thinking about being a mother, really being a portal and bringing, new life into the world. And another inspiration is just because I really love swimming in the ocean. I'm a mad ocean swimmer. So my mum's here and she knows that even when I was heavily pregnant, I'd be right out the back swimming with the sharks, just really enjoying doing laps out the back of the ocean. And so for me, that's my very peaceful place. So I think those two things kind of coalesced into that poem.
Thanks so much. There's another poem that I'd like you to read, which is called Bend Along. It's on page 84.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this poem is it's in memoriam to a beautiful friend of ours who passed away, very suddenly and very young. So just once again meditating on the sort of the uncertainty of life and death. Bend along. I wish when you came to the cabin that morning, I'd stopped rushing and asked, would you like some tea, and taken the time to sit down with you at the long table. It would have been fine just to trade idle trifles and benignly swell our day. You taught me how to fold in the middle, ducking deep down into the chill water to explore the unplumbed world below, before leading me back through the rising tide, scouting a safe path to tread. Now I hope someone shows you how to fold in the middle. I hope someone guides you where to place your feet. I hope someone helps you to sink without strain to the glittering floor of your mind.
Look, for me, and I always, I don't like to second guess that when I interpret a poem, it's the one that was meant by the poet. But what really struck me with that particular first verse is that I think as a writer, particularly, I spend a lot of time trying to escape people and just get the writing done. So, if there's a knock on the door, I won't answer it. I'll pretend I'm not home just to get the writing done, because the fervor or the need to get it done surpasses almost everything. And then sometimes there are times when I think, if I'd stopped rushing and asked my neighbour or asked a friend, would you like a cup of tea? Perhaps that was more important than anything I could have created on the page. Is that where you were coming from, or is that not too far off the mark?
Yeah, I think slightly. I suppose more just the general busyness of life, that we do get so busy that we don't realise that sometimes our interaction with someone could possibly be our last interaction. And if we knew that, we would pay much more attention, and it would be, a lot more meaningful. But I absolutely get where you're coming from in terms of the writing, because as a writer, you're always, you're, especially as a mom, and everyone's busy, not just mums, but you are always trying to get that little bit of time to sink into your own mind. And there's always that push and pull between doing that, but also paying attention to what's in the outside and to other people, which is equally meaningful. So it's always a little bit of a balancing act, I think.
It really struck me, that poem. Another poem called Blinds, which is on page 24, and from memory, it's a very short one,
Short but not sweet. Okay, here we go. Blinds. I close the blinds to block out probing eyes. The roses on the windowsill still flame against the sky. Darkness crawls out early from the rain. A stranger calls to check that I'm alive.
Where's that from? What inspired that poem?
I think I think generally, I live in a house with a lot of windows. It's funny. I have it's hard to find as you said, as a writer, it can be hard to find a quiet moment or a quiet space. especially, you know, if you have a busy life and kids and so forth. So I think it's come from that place, just wanting to, when you're in that mood, to really retreat from the world, to try and find that space, and, you know, not necessarily be answerable for your state of mind or your mood at that time. So yeah, I think that very much speaks to what you were talking about before, Suzanne. Yeah.
And there's two more poems. I just love being read to. 2020 is on page 32.
Oh. All right. 2020. Great. 2020. 16 years ago, your mother swept past me in the store, her eyes not dropping to my belly. That Christmas, we were not invited, but by the next, granted entry after birthing their grandson. I gifted my new parents-in-law a freestanding double picture frame, my daughter on one side of the divide, her baby brother on the other. Next visit, only one of my children buried beneath a cousin. Why didn't I decry it then, or earlier when, the room overblown with foreigners now called family, your father passed his swaddled heir around and unbound him to admire the new jewel in his crown? Instead, I chose to push my power with all my power down. And when the nurse asked if I was all right, love, I should not have acquiesced, for the stigma steeped in silence has festered ever since. And when I saw your mother in the supermarket today, it was I who pretended not to see.
Do you want to talk about the inspiration, or should we just make our own assumptions?
Well, it probably is best to move on from that one, I think. I mean, some poems are, as Emily Dickinson said, you can tell it's slant, and that's the beauty of poetry. You can embed your truths in there without being too narrative and too obvious. I think that one is quite a narrative poem. Yeah. It's probably quite self-explanatory, but it's one of those poems where, yeah, when looking back, you revisit your younger self and your decisions and rethink how you may or may not have done things differently. Whether that would have turned out better or not is another question.
And away from the inspiration or the content, I do like a narrative poem. I do like the power in a small number of words that can absolutely tell a story. I mean, I absolutely can see each image, and I can absolutely see where that went, how that was, and who the actors were. I think was it a difficult poem to write, to get right, to get the word?
Yeah, it was. And with poems like that are a little bit more personal and a little bit more narrative, it's always really difficult to decide what to leave in and what to leave out as well, and you know whose story it is to tell and so forth. But I just always feel like I'm a better out than in girl when it comes to writing. You know, I just think, why write if you're not going to write your truth? And you know, you've got to write things with compassion but also truth, and I think that can resonate with lots of people and in the end be quite helpful. But yeah, that sort of subject matter is tricky.
Let's end on Bow and Scrape, which is page 25.
Thank you. Okay, Bow and Scrape. How freeing to bow out, there's wisdom in it. Mind's tumescence halted. What's twisted in you, no longer twisting in me. Silence is best, stillness, trying not to put a word wrong. I speak so circumspectly these days, even the dog won't come. Enough, just keep going, but let's admit it's not much fun.
What led to that poem?
So many things. I think it's hard to say. Like, our family was going through quite a lot of difficulties, and it was just a dark time. And I think that when, you know, everyone goes through dark times in life, and that's I think it's good to admit that, especially if you're a poet, because really that's where poetry comes to its fore. You know, when there's funerals, when basically when the shit hits the fan, people turn to poetry. It's one of those things that speaks to what is, you know, deepest and darkest in people. And certainly some of my favorite poets are the poets who unashamedly and bravely deal with that sort of thing. So I think that was just coming out of a few years of difficulties, and you know, you get to a point where you come to a sort of a stillness, actually. You go through all the tumult of emotions, up, down, up, down, up, down. And eventually you just kind of, it's like diving under a wave. You just get to a stillness and you think, okay, you know, whatever comes, comes. So that's, yeah, that was the emotional space that poem came out of.
Thank you. I'd like to move a bit away from your poetry and to your work in Verity La. For those people who don't know what Verity La is, could you just give me a potted version?
Yeah, so we're an online creative arts magazine. So we basically publish, you know, all sorts, but, you know, poetry, fiction, non-fiction, you know, poetry videos. We've been going since 2010, but I've only been the managing editor since about 2015, so 5 or 6 years now. Yeah, and it's a sort of a journal that prides itself on sort of showcasing like a diversity of voices and sort of more cutting edge, edgy sort of work as well.
Now, you've said right at the beginning of our talk that there's not much money in poetry, and I can imagine there's not much money in a poetry journal. How do you make this, or how have you made this journal work? There's a lot of work to be done in creating something like that.
Yeah, there definitely is. When I took it over from the former editor, Nigel Featherston, his mandate was, you know, he basically wanted to hand it over to someone else because he'd been doing it for 5 years, which is a long time, because it's you know, it's a job that doesn't pay and it takes a long time, and he wanted to focus on his own writing. So he really wanted someone who would take it on and try and make it a financial venture. So up until then, the journal didn't pay anybody, and which was fine, because there's so many, especially within poetry, really great literary journals that don't pay people. Poets are used to doing stuff without being paid, unfortunately, and it's just kind of, you know, the way it was. And so I took it on knowing that that was kind of the mantle I was taking on, and I'm not the most financially savvy person, so that was a little bit scary for me, thinking, oh, how do I go about trying to make this happen? But we were really lucky, you know, we got funding from Australia Council, from Create New South Wales for a couple of years, and we started up also doing subscriptions. We started a little press where we started to sell some chapbooks. I think Linda, who's here tonight, we just published her chapbook a couple of months ago, Count the Ways. And so we started to publish some chapbooks and do fundraising, and you kind of hodgepodge it together. I think in the arts, especially if you're a small or medium-sized journal, yeah, you go along and you do your best. And, you know, we managed to, you know, we had a great team of editors, but we also managed to just, everyone was voluntary and everyone's passion was there, and we managed to just pay writers, which was the real goal.
You said that you've been the managing editor from 2015, but there has been a gap where for some time Verity La closed down. Can you tell me what brought that about?
Well, we didn't really close down as such. We had a bit of a hiatus for about 3 or 4 months, but you know, in 2020 we did have sort of a issue where we had a story that was you know, not very well received, and we had to deal with the fallout from that, and decide what to do about that, which we did do. And then after that, we had, you know, personally, you know, it was quite difficult to continue after that, because there was a lot of you know, social media sort of negativity, which you have to contend to. And really in these days, that's just part and parcel of, unfortunately, being in publishing, being being an editor, anything like that, you know, and it's an evolving issue, what's acceptable and not acceptable within the, you know, the current social climate. So that's something you have to navigate, and it can be quite tricky. So, you know, whilst dealing with that, we closed down for a few months and then started publishing again. And so this last year we've picked up again very cautiously. But what I've tried to do is just really do it in a way that's more enjoyable for myself. Because I found that towards the end of our time, we were getting relatively successful in the small, you know, very small literary pond, and managing to pay writers and so forth. But I was putting in many, many hours and just feeling, you know, I loved it, but when we had issues, I had to reassess, you know, how much is worth it. And I think it's difficult because the arts is very much under it's under stress from the outside. It's so underfunded, you know, especially under this current government. You know, there's not a lot of support for the arts, you know, so it's really difficult. But also from the inside, there's a lot of internal stresses and factors which many people looking from the outside aren't aware of. So I had to reassess for myself personally how much I was willing to give to that and to the community, you know. And so what I did this year was start back just very gradually and just do again, try and find again what brought me into the scene initially, what brought me pleasure, what brought me joy, who I wanted to support, what I wanted to support. And it actually has been, although it was a very stressful time, it was also a really, really great time in terms of learning as well. You have to go back to what your initial reasons for coming into that scene. And for me, it was really, it was poetry, it was supporting great work, it was supporting great people. And I think you know, that's I wanted to scale it back and just start again with some really, you know, some really beautiful work, and just make sure I was enjoying every moment again, because life is short. So if you're not doing that, especially in the arts where you don't get paid anything or very little, then you're not doing it, you know, then why are you doing it? So that was my own ethos for this year. Next year we'll see.
And does Verity Leal continue the subscription base for people to subscribe to it, or how does the public interact with Verity Leal?
Yeah, everything on Verity Leal is free to read, and that's a sort of a model I inherited. But then, having said that, you know, the writers didn't used to get paid, so that made a lot of sense. I really like having a free to read base. You know, before we had a break from publishing last year, we were going great guns. We were setting up, you know, as I said, our press, and we were getting a lot more subscribers and doing quite well. So that's all been scaled back a bit now. We still do have some subscribers, bless them. And yes, definitely, if anyone would like to subscribe and support the journal, they can do so at any level. You know, everything goes back into basically paying writers and just paying admin costs. So we do have that. We still have our little press going, which, you know, hopefully next year we'll publish a couple more little chapbooks. And yeah, we'll just, I think maybe we built too quickly, you know, and I think this is an opportunity to start again and to go more slowly and to decide what's really important and to build more carefully. So yeah, we do have a subscription base, we have books to sell, and we have amazing people that we can showcase. So that's my focus for next year.
I've just got a question that's come out of that little discussion from Elizabeth Walton, and her question is, what kind of submissions are you looking for at the moment?
Well, at the moment, we're looking for submissions where people don't want to be paid, to be quite honest. And I hate saying that because I really loved paying writers. You know, the last 3 years, through a combination of grants and fundraising and scrabbling, we were able to pay writers, and I absolutely loved, even if it's just a little bit, even if it's just $50 or $100, you know, especially poets. It's so rare to be paid, and it's so lovely to be able to pay writers. And to be honest, most people are not paying their bills through that, but it values your work. It gives, you know, it gives the person, you know, a sense of pride. And so, yeah, at the moment this year, we haven't been able to pay people. So what I've done is really, it's just been word of mouth, and people have sent me work and said, I'm happy to have this published. Would you like to? And I've gone, yeah, that's lovely. We'll publish that. So just supporting good people, supporting good work. Next year, I'm hoping we will get some funding, but, you know, basically we're always looking for really just fine fiction, fine poetry, a little bit of nonfiction. We're really quite broad in what we're looking for.
With every guest that I have on Thursday Book Club, I ask for 3 book recommendations, and I think collections books, and I think you've come armed with those today. Is that right?
Absolutely. So I thought I would bore everyone with a couple of poetry collections. Well, not bore, I shouldn't say that, because I find them extremely exciting, but I'm not sure how many poets we have watching. But one of my favorite books of poetry is by my dear friend, and he was my co-poetry editor as well on Verity, and his name's Robbie Coburn, and his book is called The Other Flesh, and it's from UWA Publishing. It was published last year. And I can't talk about Robbie's poetry enough. He's only, because I'm quite old and he's quite young, I think of him as perennially, you know, 21, but I think he's actually about 25 now. But he is just the most amazing natural poet. You know, he doesn't come from a literary family. He grew up in a farm in Woodstock in Victoria, and somehow this young man just has this incredible passion and talent for poetry, and just reads everybody and knows everything, and it's quite amazing. So I would really recommend him. He was one of the first youngest Australians to be included in the very famous poetry magazine, which comes out of Chicago. And, you know, that's a real honor. This is like the mecca of poetry. To get a poem in, you know, poetry magazine is great. I haven't had one, but Robbie had one when he was like 20. So he's very talented. So I really recommend The Other Flesh by Robbie Coburn. Another writer I absolutely love, I think because I resonate with her ethos, is Sharon Olds. So she's an American poet, and I think she's very much like me, a better out than in poet. And like me, she started writing a little bit later in her life. So I have my first book published when I was 40. She had her first book published at 37, and she is she has incredible poems where she's not afraid to just tell it like it is. And when she started to publish poetry, she was told to send them to women's magazines because no one would be interested in these women's issues, you know. And actually, since then, she's absolutely shown everybody who said that, you know, up, and she's incredibly, you know, popular and well read now. So my favorite book by her is probably Satan's Says, which is her first book, which is really shocking and out there, but she's had incredible books since then as well. And my last recommendation is a memoir, which I haven't read, but is on my to-read list. I can't wait to read it. And it's The Erratics by Vicky Lo Vahavia. And it's a memoir, and she talks about her own childhood, you know, which is relatively dysfunctional. And I'm very much looking forward to reading that. But because it's a little bit longer, I'm used to reading only poetry now. It's on the summer reading list when I have a bit of time.
I can well recommend it. It's for those who haven't read it, it's caustic, it's scathing, it's got a beautiful rhythm to it, and a really interesting publication story behind it, which culminated in Vicky Laveau Harvey winning the Stella Prize. So it's it's a great book, and I'll add all these recommendations to the newsletter for next week.
Thank you.
Michelle, I'm going to open to some questions. Just beforehand, I'm going to ask you to choose me a number between 1 and 13, please.
Okay, I'll go 9.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, I'm sorting that out. I think the best way we're going to do it is to have questions put in the chat room if there are some. So we've had Elizabeth said, thank you very much for the information about the submissions. We've got some great comments while I wait for some questions to come in. Great to hear you, Fab Michelle. This is an excellent book. Great to tune in, Michelle. Thanks, love, Sharon Olds. I love Sharon. I thought it was.
I'm assuming Sharon's not here, unfortunately.
She's obviously had the Google alert already. And so we've got a question now again from Elizabeth Walton. How are you faring now after the dramas of cancel culture? Just before you answer that, I might just note to people who aren't aware of this that Michelle had an article written in the Australian in the Review magazine last Saturday, which was the 13th and 14th of November. So if you want to look at that, that will give you a background as to Elizabeth's question. Michelle, is that something you're comfortable answering?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for asking. It's not an easy thing to speak out. There's many different views about cancel culture, and some people think it doesn't exist at all, and some people think it's the end of the world, and I'm somewhere in between. But having been someone who's personally experienced a little bit of it, I can say I think that the main issue with cancel culture actually is the psychological damage that it wreaks on people. So, many people say there's no such thing as cancel culture because, for example, in my case, they said, well, you have an article in the Australian, so you haven't been silenced. And I never actually claimed to be silenced, but that's often one thing which is said about cancel culture, that people have been silenced and then they go on to create new platforms, and then people say, well, you've not been silenced, you have a new platform. And that's quite true, actually. But I think that for me, the main detriment of cancel culture is not so much that you've been silenced, or not even it's not even necessarily the lack of opportunities or the fact that you lose work. Those things do happen, and they did happen to me and happen to many people. Some people, for example, if you're a celebrity, you can afford to lose work, through cancel culture. It's okay. You're well off. It's okay. But and for me, even, the work that I lost, certainly no one's making their money out of poetry. Our family wasn't dependent on my poetry revenue, so that was okay. The real damage was in the psychological damage, and how it really works is shaming. People are shamed, and people are shamed for making very small mistakes, sometimes no mistakes at all. They're shamed whether they apologize or they don't apologize. They're shamed if their apology isn't the right kind of apology, and so on and so forth. And so what I really would urge everyone to do is to think really carefully before you make decisions about people and their character and their actions, because these days we often just click on a tweet and that's it. We believe something that's said and off we all go. And behind that is a person. And actually, even if that person is a celebrity, they're still a person, and there's still psychological damage to be wreaked. So I think it's really important just to hold back. I think that social media has a really important part to play in activism and righting social wrongs. I don't think there's a problem with everyone airing their views and, having good democratic, differences of opinion. But I think it's when you start character assassinating and so forth that really, that's where the damage is. And there's no benefit to anyone. I don't think it really actually changes things. So I would really like to see another way for the literary community to move forward and to learn how to talk to each other.
There's a question now from Tim Heffernan, and his question is, can Verity La regain the diverse streams, especially from marginalised writers?
Oh, bless you, Tim. Thank you. Tim was one of our beautiful editors for Clozapine Clinic, which was a stream of writing that he and Elise Blaney set up for for writers with mental health issues, and he and Elise did amazing work, and actually some of the most exciting things that we published came through that stream. So yeah, it would be really nice to see that happen again. To be honest, I feel like the fact that Verity Leal positioned itself in, which was really my initiative, positioning itself as a journal that wanted to support marginalised writers, that was done with the best of intentions, but maybe quite naively, given current social and just, you know, current trends in literature and publishing, where it can be a very contentious field. So I kind of wandered into that with the best of intentions, not realizing that perhaps I was putting a little bit of a cross on my own back. But having said that, I still think it's really important work and really important to do. So thank you, Tim. Yes, if you're up for it. Brave soul.
One last question, which is, what are you working on now?
Oh, that's a nice question. Was that from Audrey?
No, that's from Elizabeth Walton again.
Oh, Elizabeth, thank you.
Who's a writer and also a musician.
What I'm working on now is finishing up the year, and then what I find it very hard to. So I do a lot of editing, you know, editing people's manuscripts or poetry or PhDs or whatever it is. You know, that's kind of my paying job besides poetry, which doesn't pay so much. But so when I finish up Verity Leal for the year, which finishes up generally, you know, around beginning of December, and when I finish that, I would just love to get back into doing some poetry and getting back to where I started from, because I find it difficult to have my working hat on and be thinking sort of from a more administrative or, you know, editing point of view. I think that the parts of your brain that are the editing parts and the creative parts, it's very difficult for them to work simultaneously. And so I find it quite difficult to be creative. So I'm looking for a couple months off over summer where I can really dive in and just start writing poetry and remind myself, because I became a little bit disillusioned in the last year or so with, you know, the literary scene, the poetry scene, and just remind myself why I love it so much, and get back into it and enjoy it again.
Thank you. Just a slight correction. That question was from someone whose label is iPhone rather than Elizabeth. Just two more comments, and then I'm mindful of the time. Beautiful, and this one is from Elizabeth. Beautiful, positive attitude. Well done. A conversation of national importance. Thank you for your candor and courage.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth.
Audrey Beloy and Harry Patterson, you handled it with grace, Michelle, well done. And now, number 9, I'll just explain to you, Michelle, and to our people not so familiar with what we do. So we have a raffle, but I'm not just in terms of technology, I don't have any one of those technological wheels. So I just ask for a number, and then I have the participants to my right, and I count down to 9. And tonight, the lucky winner is a Thursday Club regular, Nola and Alexander. So Nola, you're the winner tonight. Congratulations. And I think you're on mute, Nola. And if you can just send an email with your address, and there will be something in the post, which I hope you like. So look, thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. Michelle, that was fascinating. You're a beautiful speaker and a beautiful poet, and I could have talked to you for a lot longer.
Oh, thank you so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Have a good week, everybody. And just for the regulars, next week is the Crime Writers Festival, so we won't have book club because I'll be partying. And but I'll note that in the newsletter. Back to normal the week after. So not next week, which is the 2nd, but back on the 9th. And Nola, quick email, and then we'll have your prize in the mail. And I wish you all a good week. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for coming along.